Welcome to the DIY Sportsman Podcast with your hosts, Garrett Prawl and Bobby Boswell.
All right, guys, so today we're going to cover some Q&A, some questions and answers. Since we've been started this podcast, we've got a lot of questions and answers through Instagram, Facebook, YouTube channel, everything like that. So today we're going to kind of go through some of that list and go down the list one at a time. A lot of these are kind of directed more towards Garrett and reference a lot of his videos, but there's some in here that are kind of a mix for both of us. So you ready for this, Garrett?
Oh yeah, as ready as I'm going to be.
All right, so the first one up is from Mark on Facebook. Do you use a rope mod or buckles with climbing sticks now?
Yeah, so I've used both. And in one of my recent videos, I said that I was going back to the buckles from the rope. And the reason that I gave for that was that the climbing sticks are the speed option, whereas the steps, like the wild edge steps, are more of like a compact option. So if the steps are the speed option, you might as well make them even faster by going with the buckles. Basically, in a nutshell, the buckles are faster, easier to use. The ropes are much lighter, and they are less noisy, or less potential to make noise because there's nothing metal on them. And it's probably something, to be completely honest, I'll go back and forth on. Whenever I'm using the ropes, I'll think, oh, I could do this even faster if I had the buckles. And whenever I'm using the buckles, I'm always thinking back to how nice and quiet and lightweight the ropes were. Right now, I am using the ropes. I went back to those AM steel rope mods on my climbing sticks. But who knows? It might just be something that I go back and forth on forever.
Which makes sense. I mean, you think about it, the weight versus the noise potential. It's just, it's kind of up in the air at that point. You both kind of they've got their advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so the next one up is from outdoorsman.alex on Instagram. Advice on cutting down full-length climbing sticks. Yeah,
so this one I've seen quite a few threads on both the Saddle Hunter and Hunting Beast and Facebook. Basically, the two-step climbing stick with a longer step spacing has become very popular. So what a lot of guys are doing is they're taking full-length Lone Wolf sticks or full-length Hawk Helium sticks. They're removing the middle step, basically, and they're shortening the sticks from their full length down to like 24 or 26 inches. Then they're reattaching the hardware for that top step, and then attaching something like a Versa button to be able to attach the stick to the tree. And so I guess my advice on that, number one, it should be obvious, but be aware that you're voiding any kind of warranty and you're taking all safety into your own hands when you do a climbing stick mod. When you're taking a beam like that starts off at a longer length and it only has basically two tree brackets that are contacting the tree, the shorter you make that span, so the shorter you make the climbing stick, the stronger it's going to be because you're shortening that beam. So there shouldn't be much of a risk. I wouldn't go ahead and just start drilling a bunch of holes everywhere because that's having a lot larger impact. But simply doing something like shortening the beam that climbing stick on, from a mechanical standpoint, has very little impact on the overall strength of the stick as long as you're doing everything right.
So I'm just going to kind of spin one off of that. Would you recommend buying a stick and cutting it down or doing like a DIY option?
Well, if you can get the steps like what you did with your Muddy Hunter sticks and then you get your own aluminum, that's fine too. With something like the Hawk, a lot of guys like the Hawk sticks and how those steps fold up. And in that case, I mean, you'd have to buy the stick. It's pretty tough to be able to mod something like that from scratch yourself because I got that custom extrusion. But you can go either way with it.
Okay. So here's one that we got from just a lot of people from across the board. They want to know, what unit did you go to in Colorado?
Yeah. It's whenever I upload an elk video or a mule deer video, that's a question that gets asked very commonly, and I don't think it's ever something I really answered in public. I've answered a few guys through private messages, but one thing to remember is that anytime that I make a video that potentially gets thousands of views and I answer a question like that, then all of a sudden thousands of people instantly know what unit that was. And part of it is I don't really want to share, but the other part of it is too that I think that there's enough elk and mule deer in Colorado that it's like whatever unit you pick, you're probably going to have just as good of a likelihood as another unit. I think kind of the micro scale and how you hunt it is probably more important than what unit you pick. and doing research as far as, harvest stats and statistics and all that kind of stuff. So realistically, I don't think the unit that you pick, if you try and like go the same unit, is probably not going to make any difference as if you pick your own. It's just kind of the way I look at it.
I'll just put it out there. If you say that unit, it's going to turn to like the Wasatch Front here in Utah. It is slam packed full of people. You'll see more people than deer in a day out here typically.
That next question looks like it's pretty similar.
Yeah. They want to know if you hunt from Carlos Avery.
Yeah, so
or do you hunt Carlos Avery?
The Twin Cities metro area has a ton of public land around it. And on the north side of the metro, there's like a 30,000 acre. No, it's not 30,000. It's like 20,000 acre public marsh called the Carlos Avery Wildlife Management Area. And because it's so large and because it's so close to Minneapolis, just about everybody and their brother knows about it. And it gets just pounded with pressure. But despite the fact that it gets pounded with pressure, it also has a very good habitat for bedding cover. There's a lot of water, a lot of cattails, a lot of bog stuff that's really hard to access. And as a result of that, even though it gets a lot of pressure, there's still a lot of places for deer to go and deer to hide. So there's still big buck opportunity out there. And kind of along the same lines of the unit thing in Colorado, I don't usually come out in public and just say which like WMAs I'm hunting around the Twin Cities. I will say that I've hunted quite a few of them. Carlos Avery is one, but there are several others that I've hunted and continue to hunt. When you get something that's so close to home like this, part of it is if I start giving out spots and trying to be helpful, not only does that give away the spots that I worked to get, but a lot of these places I talk with in confidence with some of my friends that also hunt the same areas. So if I give away spots or tips to certain places that I hunt, that's also affecting the people that are close to me that share information in confidence with me, and I don't want to necessarily spoil their stuff either. But if you're thinking about going to Carlos Avery, there's plenty of deer. You just got to do your homework, look any place else, find the spots that are overlooked, and you can definitely have a great hunt out there. I know a lot of nice deer that have been taken from that wildlife management area.
A lot of kind of tiptoeing around to basically say, I'm not going to give you my spot, but you do your homework and you can find a really good spot.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the thing. Like with any of the stuff that I try and tell people, it's usually not necessarily like a pinpoint, but it's like, here's the stuff to look for. And if you can find this stuff on your own, like you're going to do well,
Which makes sense. I mean, nobody wants to give away their spot.
Right. Try and teach a man how to fish versus giving them a fish. And I point a lot of people to Dan Infalt stuff because that's the type of DVDs that would, ABC give you the breakdown of how to hunt and scout a place like that.
With social media now and everything, stealing spots, especially out here in the West, has become huge because, like, if you post a grip and grin photo and you have the background of the mountains behind you, a lot of people can pick out what mountain range that is and pinpoint what basin you were hunting in. So, a lot of people now won't even post any type of background like of a mountains or a skyline or anything. It'll all be down into the timber or into the rocks, basically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, fishing's the same way. Somebody takes a trophy photo and all of a sudden you see there's the, telephone tower in the background. Oh, I know where that is. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. All right, on to the next one. We got this one from a few people from Instagram. It was Dakota Cart, and on YouTube, Grizzled Millennial. Want to know, do you like 4-fletch or 3-fletch better?
I guess I go back and forth. I'm shooting 4-fletch right now. I tried 3-fletch with longer vanes, and that seemed to work fine too. For me, the biggest thing is if I shoot 4-fletch, then it gives me, like you said last podcast, one more spot to be able to knock tune to. And in addition, I have plenty of fletching clearance from the cables and the rest. I'm able to use a lower profile fletch. The vanes I'm using right now are the Q2i Fusion X2, which are actually a target vane, and I have those in 4-fletch, and I'm getting great broadhead flight with that setup. So that's what I'm using right now.
What about on your traditional bow? Are you running 2, 3, 4?
I have 3 right now, 3 5-inch feathers, but I might play around with that.
So I run 4 fletch as well, and I run a lower profile vane. I think they're about 2.8 inches long and about 0.41 inches high. I think they're a Swift. I don't even know who makes them. But I run a 4 fletch on my compound, and then on my traditional bow, I run the same in a feather. So it's a 2.8 inch feather, about the same height, but I only run 2 fletch on my traditional bow compared to 3 fletch, just for the fletching clearance, basically passing through the riser and on the riser.
Do you have that set just off of vertical?
Yeah, at about the 2 and 7 o'clock or somewhere in that range, probably 2 and 8.
Okay, that makes sense.
Whatever that comes out to. So basically, one of my lower fletching goes between my shelf and my side plate, so there's no contact with the riser.
And you're getting
shooting off the shelf.
You're getting pretty good flight with that setup.
Yeah, getting really good flight. And the benefit of that is a lot of weight forward, so a lot of front of center. You don't need as much fletching to steer the arrow because, like we've talked about in other podcasts, it's basically pulling the arrow.
Right.
All right, on to the next one. A lot of people ask this question. Will you ever make a set of climbing sticks or even just a step?
Yeah, so when I made that video last fall of my DIY climbing sticks and showed how I cut out those steps on my router, I mean, there's literally been, I'm not even kidding, like dozens and dozens of people that have asked for climbing sticks, and I tell them no, and then they ask for just the steps and they can get the tubing, and I also have to say no. I looked into what insurance would cost if I wanted to cover myself for doing something like that, and there wasn't even close to the amount of return. In addition to that, my machine, that's like pushing what my machine is ideally supposed to be capable of doing. It cuts aluminum and it cuts wood, but it's made for cutting wood. Ideally, if I was cutting aluminum, I'd want a better machine, something with a little heavier weight and a little bit more power behind it. So with my job, it ends up being like, oh, I can do like maybe 1 step a day. If I have free time that afternoon, it ends up taking like 2 weeks just to get a full set of sticks together. It's just not worth my time. So what I've told some people is if they can find the steps like you did with your Muddy Hunter sticks, you can make your own. Otherwise, you don't need a router. A lot of guys have made their own steps too, just by using other tools like a combination of like a drill press and table saw or like a table router. There's other ways you can make those steps, and you don't have to cut the trough out of the step. If you want to use 2 bolts, that'll also keep the steps from pivoting as much. And then there's also the great option of just waiting until Dan comes out with his climbing sticks, which should be, I think, any day now. He's going to start taking pre-orders on the Hunting Beast website. And to the best of my knowledge, so far, they're going to be 2 pounds a stick, including the strap, the cam buckle. And then they are going to be, I think, around $80 a stick or so. But they'll be functionally almost identical to the sticks that I made. But they're obviously going to be manufactured a little bit nicer.
And so if you guys haven't seen the Dan Infault stick, you can go over to thehuntingbeast.com and look at his stick design. It's a really good design in my opinion. For me, the 2 biggest things for sticks is step spacing and how they attach to the tree. I'm not a Versa button fan, and I like long sticks or step spacing. But step spacing is something that you could just buy a new tube, replace that hardware, like what we were talking about with the cut down stick question. Would you cut it down or basically build a new one?
Yeah, and he basically made those sticks to be his personal sticks. He made it how he would want to make them. He's got tons of experience doing his beast style of hunting, so if anybody would know what a good climbing stick would be, he's the guy.
All right, next up, this is a really good question. It's really interesting. I'm interested to hear what your answer is going to be. From Instagram, JTurner4998 says, if you were to buy one GPS today, what feature would it need to have?
Yeah, so like 5 years ago, I probably would have had a different answer than I do now. For hunting around the Midwest and a lot of my whitetail stuff, I've almost entirely replaced my handheld GPS with my cell phone, just because I'm never out in the woods long enough where battery life really becomes an issue, and I can always carry a spare battery bank as well. And my cell phone service and GPS signal is usually good enough that I don't have any issues. The cell phone screen is much brighter, much clearer, much better detailed, easier to look at. And with the various apps that are available, I can do most of what I would want to do on my phone. That being said, out in Colorado, I'm absolutely still going to use a handheld GPS. And a couple of the features that are pretty much need to haves in my opinion. One is topo lines. You can either get them pre-installed on the GPS, depending on what version you get, or you can find a free website like gpsfiledepot.com, download your state's topo lines onto that GPS using some kind of free software to transfer that information, and then you can get that topo information on your GPS. Having the ability to load aerial images on a handheld GPS isn't as important of a thing for me, just because usually the screens that come on those handheld GPSs are low enough detail, low enough resolution that it's really hard to make out stuff anyway. I'd rather just look at a map and then be able to correlate that with the topo lines that I'm seeing very clearly on my GPS. The one feature that my Garmin 62S does not have that I really wish it would have is the ability to see where your buddies are in real time. I think we might have talked about that last fall a little bit. Basically, it's for one, a safety feature, and for two, it's kind of a practical thing, being able to make sure that you're not going to be covering the same ground that somebody else just covered. We have to kind of guess right now because nobody has their cell phones on all the time when we're out in a group. So if you're out in a group and you have no way of really communicating with your friends other than a walkie-talkie, it makes it tough to know exactly where they are in real time. And if they've got their stuff turned off on the way back, you may not know a half an hour after dark if the person is hurt or if they're still on their way back. If you're unable to get communication, having a real-time location of at least knowing that somebody's moving could be a big deal. So if I were to get a GPS now for the Western use and hunting in a group, I would get a GPS that has the ability to see in real time where everybody's at. I think the Garmin Rhinos are that way. There's probably a few other ones as well.
I think the Onyx, the new digital map on your cell phone thing, is kind of giving a lot of people some false security about using their phone in the backcountry, especially out here in the West, is that your phone will break a lot easier than your GPS will. Crack the screen on your phone or you break the screen, you're going to have a lot of issues if that's all you're relying on as a GPS. So to me, having a basic kind of idea of land nav, using a compass and a map, wherever I go, I typically have a map of that area with me and a compass just for general land nav use. But as for one feature to have in a GPS, I really don't know of one. I don't need a big screen. I mean, topo maps are nice, but if I have a map, I have that on my physical map for the most part. So topo lines aren't as necessary. Really, all I need to do is be able to mark a waypoint like my truck, my camp, and where I drop my pack. And to be able to navigate back to those 3 points basically would be the biggest features that I would have to have, which every GPS made nowadays has that ability to just navigate back to those points.
Yep.
All right, on to the next one. From a lot of people again, advice on camera gear. What about camera brand, Nikon, Sony? What about that? What are your recommendations on camera gear?
Yeah, so a lot of questions I get are, what do you think about this camcorder? And it's usually a camcorder that runs in like the $200 to $400 price range. And to be completely honest, of the cameras that I've used in the lower price range, kind of that entry-level consumer camcorder, there's not a ton of differences that I see in image quality. For me as a self-filmer, some of the features that I like to see, and I'll probably do an entire podcast or video at some point on my entire self-filming setup and why I choose what I choose. But basically, I want to have the ability to run a shotgun mic directly into the camera, not bypassing with an external recorder. I want to be able to plug in a remote to handle the on-off and the zoom. And I want to ideally have 4K as a self-filmer. It's not as necessary if you're filming other people, but I find that it's nice to be able to film in 4K and then crop in post. And then the other thing you get with a more expensive camera are nicer things that just help with image quality overall, better sensors, bigger sensors, the ability to gather more light through a larger iris. So those are things that they're harder to tell people what the difference is going to, show up as. But when I look at the footage from a cheaper camcorder that I've taken and I compare that to something like the FDR AX100, which is still over $1,000 used. Actually, you probably get them under $1,000 used now. I mean, there's just a big difference in image quality. So that's kind of what it boils down to. Usually with a cheaper camcorder, I mean, you're basically running auto mode, you're turning the thing on, you're hitting record and pointing at it, and you're going to have kind of grainy low light. You're not going to have much control over the image. And that could be a good thing. I mean, you might have a situation where you might not know how to use the features that a more expensive camera could give you. And in that case, you probably would be better off with a cheaper camcorder and just live with a little bit lower image quality. And that's probably fine for a lot of people. But just know that there's probably not going to be much difference in what you choose as long as you're like under that $400 or $500 new price range. So you might as well just get one that has as many features as you want, or find one that you get a good deal on.
Which really makes sense when you talk about, the features. Are you going to be able to use all the features in a more expensive camera compared to a lower end camera? If you think at some point you're going to learn to use those features, or you're going to know how to use those features properly, I think that's a big thing to consider. For a lot of people who are just out there trying to film their hunts for their buddy or for their own interest, I guess, you're probably not. But if you're trying to go out there and make videos like you do on YouTube, high quality videos, things like that, eventually you're probably going to want to learn to use those features to the fullest extent of the camera. So I think that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. Next question up. Lost where I'm at. Okay. What is a good go-to method for climbing a tree? What do you do if you encounter a big branch? And have you modified the wild edge steps so you don't have to tie them every time?
So to answer the first part of that question, what's my go-to climbing method? It's still probably climbing sticks. I'm still hanging on to the wild edge steps and getting a lot of practice with those, just because the whole bulk factor is so, it's just a big difference in terms of how well those things pack, and the fact that you can stuff everything that you own and are taking out on a hunt inside of a backpack. That's pretty nice. But still, for me, the go-to is climbing sticks. Climbing sticks with aiders for me. What I do if I encounter a big branch. So there's a couple ways you can handle this. If you're close to the ground and it's a small enough tree, what I sometimes find myself doing unofficially is I will hug the tree trunk with my knees. And if I feel totally secure, sometimes I'll just flip that lineman's belt up over that branch. That's obviously a very risky thing to do. I don't recommend that people do that, but I'm just being totally honest. Usually the best thing to do is to use a second rope when you're going around a branch. So that might be your tree tether. So you have your lineman's belt below the branch, you hook up your tree tether above the branch just long enough that you can flip that lineman's belt over the branch, reclip in, then you remove that tether and keep on going. Or you could just continue using that tether as your lineman's belt up until you hit the next branch. Or there's another option that we saw down in Saddlepalooza. One of the girls there, I think Jess, had a piece of AM steel rope, 7/64. It's the kind of rope that you usually use for like tying a hammock. What's the word? Bridge line. So it's a very thin diameter AM steel, but very strong, 1,600 pound brake strength. And you can clip a carabiner into that. It's small enough that it fits in like the tiniest pouch within a pouch. It takes up no space at all. And basically what she would do is when she would get to a branch, she would take that little piece of AM steel out, throw it around the tree, clip into it, basically just long enough to unclip her main lineman's belt, pass it over the branch, reclip in, and then continue to climb. So there's a couple options. The main thing is you ideally want to stay connected with something no matter what you do. And have I modified the wild edge steps at all? No, I have not. Pretty much just tie that knot every time. The second method of tying the knot, where you just do the loop and flip the loop around, you'll have to go to Wild Edge YouTube channel to see what I'm talking about. There's two methods of tying the knot, and the newer method is the one that I like. I find it a little bit easier, especially if I'm tying the steps overhead.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, the go-to climbing method, has always been my Muddy Pro sticks for the longest time. They're just, to me, they can't be beat from the design and the method, the way they go on the tree. Although the those Enopow climbers that I got off Amazon and modified, those are really interesting. And I've actually got another set made by a different company that I have right now that I'm working on a review for. They make climbing trees really interesting. Like, I enjoy climbing trees now because of those. So
really?
It's really interesting. Like, I will actually just go out and climb a tree for kicks and giggles because it's so much fun with these things on. So they're a little heavier is my only complaint. If they could figure out a way to make them just a little bit lighter, they would probably take over for my Muddy steps.
Really?
Because the benefit is, like, because they don't fully wrap a tree like, say, a climbing tree stand does. When you encounter a branch, you don't have to undo the entire thing. Basically, these only wrap around a little over half of the tree. So if I encounter a branch, I can completely remove this climber off of the tree, then step up above the tree limb, and then stand on it again. So any tree limb that I encounter, I can completely remove my foot off of the tree and then put it back on and continue to climb up. I can spiral around the tree as I go up or come down the same way. So they're really interesting. I'm really starting to like on them.
Do you like them better than the modified Enopow ones?
Yes, because they adjust a little bit easier and the foot box for them is better. But they are a little heavier than the Enopow ones. But those are the two biggest things, the biggest advantages over the Enopow ones that I have seen. If you could kind of hybridize the two, I think they would be a fantastic climbing option for hunting from a saddle or from even a hang-on tree stand if you wanted to use them that way.
And what do you do once you get to your platform setup?
Typically what I've been doing is I will just unhook them. I have them hooked to my saddle so that once I get up there, when I'll set my platform, and then I'll leave them just below it, and as I'll step up onto my platform, and then I'll pull them up and I'll hang them on the back side of the tree, or I will hang them off of my platform down below me, basically. So that way they're not really an issue. They're not around the tree where I need to move.
Interesting. Looking forward to that review.
Yeah, the big branch question, I think everybody does it. It's all kind of a judgment call. If I'm in a really comfortable position and I feel like I can just quickly unclip my lineman's belt, go over from underneath the branch to over the branch and clip back in, I will. But I always carry a second carabiner, a spare carabiner on my saddle, just so that if I encounter a situation like on a leaning tree where I'm leaning away and I don't feel comfortable enough to do that, I will use my tree strap or my tree tether to clip into my lineman's belt, go over that limb, and I'll use a spare carabiner to click into the other side so that I can move up over that limb pretty easy. All right, on to the next. How do you set up a backpack with hang-on and sticks? From Troy on Facebook. I don't know if he's talking about how you carry it in or how you set it up once you're in the tree.
I guess I can just cover both. I mean, the easiest way to attach a backpack is just to bungee it on. So if you're climbing sticks, you can either lay your climbing sticks flat or lay your climbing sticks on the center of the stand, or use something like stick talons, so you have a big open expanse across the middle of your tree stand platform. You basically just slap that backpack on some open space, use bungee cords in an X configuration to lock it onto the stand. Once you get into the tree, I mean, the easiest thing to do is just use a bow hook, whether it's a screw-in hook if you have that available, or a strap-on option, and then you can attach that to the back side of the tree.
So to me, this is a benefit of a saddle, is your backpack goes on your back compared to on your tree stand, where you have your tree stand and your backpack on your back. When you're wearing a saddle, if you wear it in, you have that backpack on your back, makes it pretty easy to carry in. That was one of the biggest complaints I always had with tree stands was, how do you carry all this stuff if you have a climber on your back, or if you have a hang-on with sticks on your back and your bag, basically. All right. How do you pack sticks with a saddle? This is from Matt on Facebook.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of related to the very last question. So when you have a tree stand, obviously packing your sticks isn't that big of a deal because your platform already takes up such a large surface area that attaching sticks to them doesn't really have that big of an impact on your overall carry package. But with a saddle, now all of a sudden you're just using a backpack, and a lot of times the climbing sticks are longer than your backpack is. So how do you deal with carrying the sticks? One option that I've tried and works fairly well is to use something like a duffel bag strap and attach that to your climbing sticks and just carry them over your shoulder. That works really well in general. The only time where it gets kind of goofy is when you're walking through some really tall grass or brush, when you want to try and stay as streamlined as possible. So the other way that I have done it and like it is I open up the backpack, shove the climbing sticks down into the backpack, and then zip the backpack up as high as it'll go. The top of the sticks will still be poking out of the top of the backpack, but then I just use a Night Eyes gear tie to kind of connect the loop at the top of the backpack and then just kind of cinch those sticks tight so they can't swing around and move back and forth.
So you're running those sticks vertical along your spine, basically.
Yeah, and mine are short enough that they're still not sticking up over my head. I can still bend over and crawl underneath stuff, and they don't really get hung up too bad.
I don't really use a backpack per se. I use a small sling pack, so I don't have the room like you do to put the sticks in a backpack. So I've always carried mine either with an additional tree strap or tree tether that I used, and I carry them basically under my right or my left arm, slung over my shoulder, basically, kind of like what you're talking about. Or I'll use a New Archery Products makes a patchy bow sling. I'll use that on my sticks. And like you said, when you encounter brush or something, what I do is typically my bow's in my left hand, and then I'll grab the sticks with the right hand. I'll just kind of point them both the direction I'm going. So then that way they're following with me instead of getting hung up on stuff to the side or behind me, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any issues with your climbing stick aiders blowing in the wind? This is a question we talked about on the forum a while back.
Yeah, it's never been an issue for me. They do blow around a little bit if it's really windy. And usually it seems like for me, if it's early season and there's a lot of leaves still on the trees, it's like that movement just kind of blends in with the movement of the leaves and stuff blowing around in the grass. It seems like you can get away with a lot more movement in general early season. Once it gets to later in the season and everything's just kind of barren, then that movement of the swaying aiders can be a little bit, they can stand out a little bit more. I've never had a deer spook because of my aiders blowing in the wind. They don't really blow that bad unless you get a really stiff breeze. But I have heard a few people mention that they think it's caused them to basically have a deer spook. It's definitely not out of the realm of possibility because they do move around a little bit. I just personally haven't had it happen to me.
Yeah, to me, when I look at this question, it's, yes, the aiders are blowing in the wind, but so is everything else in the woods. So, your tree limbs behind it, tree limbs in front of it, anything that's in the woods are going to be moving with the wind. Can a deer distinguish an aider blowing in the wind from a broken tree limb blowing in the wind? So then you kind of got to look at deer vision and how poor their vision of detail is, basically. I think it's highly, highly unlikely that a deer is ever going to see your aider blowing in the wind and blow out because of that. It's one specific thing. So to me, I don't use aiders. I don't like them personally, but I don't see that an aider blowing in the wind would be any different than anything else.
Yeah, what is their vision, like 20/60 equivalent or something like that?
Yeah, it's very poor. I think the level, if I remember right off the top of my head, the level of detail that a human can see at 100 yards is what a deer can see at 20 yards, if I remember right. So think about if you hang a climbing stick on a tree and you back up 100 yards, the level of detail you see on that climbing stick is what that deer sees at 20 yards. So pretty poor detailed vision, basically. Now, obviously, they can probably pick up motion a little easier, but it's basically like severely squinting your eyes and looking at something at 20 yards.
It's like you can see it, but you might not know what it is.
Exactly. Another aider question, another one from a lot of people. Questions on movable aiders. So an aider that basically you carry, you move one aider up as you go up, kind of like the Dave T style from the Saddle Hunter forums.
So it does solve the issue of aiders blowing in the wind. I have tried the Dave T style aider. It's just basically a large aider that you stick on the top step of your stick. So you hang your first stick on the tree, you hang that aider off your top step, you climb up, and then once you are standing on the stick, you take the aider off of the climbing stick, you climb up, attach your second stick, attach the aider onto the top of the stick, and then step into it and climb up. And then on the way down, you can sort of set your foot in the aider, and then once your foot is kind of secured in the loop, set the aider on the top of the stick so you don't have to worry about fishing your boot inside the swinging around aider loop. It does work really well. The only potential or theoretical issues with it are that, theoretically, like if you're doing something like putting the aider around your neck as you're climbing up, like theoretically, if you fell like longer than the length of your aider, which is probably already pretty unlikely, and you happen to catch that aider loop on your stick, like you could hang yourself, I think the likelihood of that actually happening is astronomically low. The only other issue, more, I guess, likely to happen would be you accidentally drop your aider, and then you got a big gap to try and jump down. So, I mean, I like it. I might actually use it this year. You just got to be aware of the potential issues, and if you're okay with that, then you might as well give it a shot. You just got to make sure too that nothing on the top of your climbing sticks has anything abrasive or sharp at all.
Yeah, really good point about putting the aider over your neck. Like you said, the likelihood of you falling, but say you're in the middle of transitioning from go over a limb like we were talking about earlier, there's a potential hazard where you could fall the length of your aider. Something like that, just a good point to bring up. All right, so climbers versus hang on with sticks. Which would you prefer?
I think the only time I would prefer a climber is if I was in some place like down south where they have those big stands of pines that you can they're like telephone poles all the way up. That's probably the only time I would ever want or choose to hunt out of a climber. A hang-on will be able to handle any tree that a climber can handle. You just need more sticks the higher up you're going to go. Whereas the climber, at least in the Midwest here where I hunt, especially when you get into marsh country, or if you get into country where there's a lot of evergreens, that climber really severely limits your ability to hunt wherever you want to hunt, and you're hunting for the right tree more than hunting for the right spot. So I'm almost always going to go with hang on and sticks for that reason.
I agree. Hang on sticks over a climber. I would probably, depending on the area, I might consider hunting off the ground before hunting out of a climber. From Facebook, Cody asks, tips on buying a kayak for hunting.
It's actually a harder question to answer than it seems like, because kayaks inherently have some disadvantages for hunting. They're really good for getting into spots, but they're not very good at carrying gear, especially like kind of your recreational, kind of your $200 to $500 kayaks. They're not very stable if you stand up typically. It's easy to get wet when you're paddling in them. So for cold weather, you got to be using some kind of water resistant or waterproof rain pants, or else your paddle's going to drip all over your pants and you'll get wet. So the alternative, there's two alternatives to a kayak. One alternative for a kayak is a canoe. Canoes are much, much better for carrying large amounts of gear. The downside with the canoe is that they're not going to be nearly as maneuverable as a kayak is. But if you were going to go on like the Boundary Waters bear hunt that we did, where you're going across large expanses of water, you got 2 coolers full of dry ice, all your hunting gear, tree stands and stuff, it's like a canoe is the only feasible option. But if you're just solo and you're hunting for deer, then you got to kind of weigh the pros and cons. Kayak's going to be easier to get there. Canoe is going to be easier to drag a deer out. Canoe is also going to be lighter, typically, if you are willing to pay for a good one. An expensive canoe made out of fiber or Kevlar, or graphite is going to run you like between 40 and 45 pounds carry weight for like an 18-foot canoe. So they can be incredibly light. Whereas a kayak, if you're getting like a touring kayak, they're pretty light. But typically the ones that guys use for hunting and fishing are like 50 pounds on the low side, and they just get heavier from there. I think the one Greg uses is like well over 100 pounds. Like he's using a trailer to drive that kayak down to the launch. And that's one of the advantages too of using a light boat, is that if you don't have an actual place along the side of the road to drop your rig, you're going to have to carry that kayak or that canoe for X number of yards to actually get to where you want to put it in the water. So I don't really have any great suggestions. The middle ground is to get something like a new canoe, where it's kind of a hybrid between a canoe and a kayak. It can carry hundreds of pounds of gear. It's a little bit heavier, so it's not going to be very easy to carry, but it's probably the best all around, I would say, for a hunting style kayak, because it can carry the weight of you and a deer, and it's still going to be reasonably easy to maneuver. And you can also attach a motor to it if you wanted to.
Yeah, I've just noticed in the past few years, it seems like kayak hunting from a kayak has gotten a lot bigger, and it seems like people are trying to go that extra mile to get away from people. So I've noticed this has come up a lot lately. And speaking of your Boundary Waters bear hunt, a lot of people just had questions about the bear hunt in general.
Yeah, a lot of people saw the video that I posted a few years ago when we did that hunt and liked the idea of it and wanted more information, like tags or logistics or tips. And the reason that this hunt is very challenging is that the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness is completely closed off to baiting. And the thing that you need to realize about Minnesota and the black bears in Minnesota and the terrain in Minnesota, especially up in the Boundary Waters, is that the land has a lot of water, it has a lot of bogs, it has a lot of swamps, and it has a lot of thick evergreens and just nasty brush and stuff that you don't even want to walk through. So being able to visually see bears is very hard to do unless you happen to see one walk out on the side of a lake. So it's landscape that's very conducive to hunting with bait. And around the entire perimeter, I guess the southern perimeter, because the northern perimeter is Canada, the southern perimeter is loaded with guys that are baiting. So bears, with their fantastic sense of smell, they can smell those bait sites along the southern border of the Boundary Waters. And so I think that close to the border, a lot of those bears are getting drawn into those bait sites. So in order to up your odds of success, you got to go deeper and deeper in. The challenge with that is that you also need to be able to get your meat out, since there's no motors allowed in the Boundary Waters. There's no wheeled carts allowed. You're portaging everything. The DNR recommends that you carry a cooler with like X number of pounds of dry ice. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, but it's a lot. So you're carrying a lot of stuff. So if you do happen to paddle a half a day to get into wherever you're going to hunt, and then you're hunting without bait, say you're using scents or you're using calls or whatever you're going to use, it's kind of tough, I think, to be able to actually pinpoint what a bear is feeding on out there. If you do happen to shoot one, now you're looking at September, where it could be fairly warm. You got to get that bear quartered out. You got to get it in the cooler. You got to get it back to the vehicle. It might be an entire, 8-12 hour event, depending on how deep you are in there. So there's a lot of logistical challenges with that type of hunt. And if I were going to do it again, I would plan on taking like minimum a week of solid hunting. Like just going up there for a couple days on like a weekend here, a weekend there, just isn't going to do it, because I don't think you're really giving yourself a good enough chance for the scents to work. You just got to be there. Literally, if you want your best chance, I think you're using scents, and you're sitting there from basically dawn till dusk every day for like a week.
And, maybe using the first 2 or 3 days of just nothing but hard scouting in whatever area you're going to be in to try to find the freshest bear sign in that area.
Yeah, and I'll be totally honest, it's very, very hard to scout on foot. A lot of our scouting was done just by looking at aerials and finding the edges of swamps, because actually traversing them by foot is very challenging. You almost want a machete. It's so thick and so boggy. I mean, like hip boots and a machete literally is like that kind of terrain.
All right, a lot of people ask about the electric mountain bikes for access. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if they're legal, they're a fantastic option. Ernie just bought one, or he built one, and he's been bragging to me about it. I really want to try it out. Basically this bike that he put together, and we have an upper limit in Minnesota of what's legally considered a bike, and then what, like, anything on top of that would, I guess, be considered, I don't really know, but if you have up to like 1,000 watts, you can basically ride it anywhere you'd be able to ride a bike, and it's classified by the state as just a normal bicycle. And you can get going to like over 20 miles an hour on a mountain bike. You can pedal and have it power assisted, or you can have it just like use the throttle, and you're basically just not using any effort yourself, and you can just drive. The big advantage, one, is speed. If you have a place that has a lot of acreage and it has kind of your Forest Service roads or logging roads or whatever that you can use to get from one location to another, you can really cut some time off of your trip, both there and back. And then the bigger advantage is with getting a deer out of the woods. If you have the ability to legally quarter a deer, and you can put that in like saddlebags on the side of your bike, on the backs of the tires and stuff like that, then that makes getting a deer out of the woods a lot easier. Or if you can hook up some kind of child cart. If you're using like a fat tire bike and you're just using your own power, no electricity, then those bikes can get really hard to pedal, and you're moving pretty slow. They can go on some really rough terrain, but if you have any kind of incline, it gets really hard to pedal. If you have any kind of snow or ice or whatever, it just makes it a lot harder. So having that electricity to give you a little extra boost can make a big difference.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is checking the laws, because even some federal agencies will classify them differently, from BLM to Forest Service to national parks. They're all classified as different methods of transportation, basically. So it's really knowing the laws, because I know they're pretty stringent on what you can use where.
Yeah, you pointed out federal land. Like a lot of the stuff we have around the cities, we have some federal, like national wildlife refuges, and do the whatever laws they have supersede what the state law is? I would imagine
Yes.
they probably do. So
Yes.
it's definitely something you got to look into.
Yeah, so while it may be legal in the state to use up to 1,000 watts, it may be illegal to use any motorized assisted bike on federal lands, for example. So you've
Right.
kind of got to know where you can use it and where you can't. A lot of people ask, can you look at a map of their land and show them where you'd scout?
I've done this a fair amount in the past. What it comes down to, honestly, a lot of the time is just the spare time that it takes to do a good job. Like if it's a type of terrain that I'm familiar with, if it's like marsh country or whatever, I can tell people this is kind of what I would look for, outline some transition lines and some potential bedding areas and stuff like that. But if it's like a 20,000 acre refuge that they got 10 miles from their house, and like, hey, can you take a look at this? It's like, well, I can take a look at it, but if I spend a little bit of time, it's not going to be that great. And if I spend a lot of time, then it's not a good use of my time, even though I'd like to help you out, But so what I a lot of times will do is I will instead kind of push people to go to the Hunting Beast forum, where they have like a land management sub forum where people can post pictures of their aerial photos and whatnot, and have a whole bunch of people kind of weigh in and give advice.
Yeah, it goes back to the teach a man to fish versus giving him a fish.
Right.
If you don't learn to scout on your own, you're never going to be good at it, compared to if you have somebody else do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, from Kidney Stones on YouTube, sounds painful. How high should you go in a tree? How high should you go in the tree in a saddle for both bow and gun? What's the minimum diameter tree you'd feel safe on?
Second part of the question is probably quicker and easier. About 4 inches or so in diameter is probably the minimum, and that's not set so much by my comfort level. It's more set by whatever platform I'm using is able to handle. Like I mentioned in my most recent video, sometimes if you're hunting a small enough tree, there's so much movement in the trunk of the tree and then the canopy by any little movement that sometimes you're almost better off just hunting on the ground than you are hunting in a very tiny tree. You're so exposed, it's very easy to make movement that a deer could notice and might make them skittish. Even if they don't see you, they might see the tree canopy shaking around, and that could ruin your hunt. So first part of the question, how high should you go in the tree? Totally dependent on the situation. Early season, I tend to not climb as high because you have the back cover and the front cover from those tree canopies. Sometimes I will intentionally stay at like 14 or 15 feet, even if I have the ability to go up higher, just because I know that if I get higher, I'm going to lose the back cover from the tree that's 20 yards behind me. So you just kind of have to think about what the deer is going to be able to see when it comes out. Usually, by the time firearm season comes around, the leaves are down for one, and I'm able to take longer shots. So I like to usually get myself higher up in the tree so that I'm able to see more stuff, especially if I'm hunting over a marsh and I can kind of see down into things.
Yeah, I agree with that part of it. Is, it's really how high you need to go depends on the situation where you're at. Obviously, if you're in a pine stand where the lowest limb is 25 feet, you're going to want to get up there pretty high. If you're hunting in a thicket where most of the tree canopy cover is 12, 15 feet, that's all you really need to be. So that part is all dependent on how high you need to be for cover and for the best visibility, because you may stop at 15 feet and have great visibility, go up to 18 feet and have 20-yard visibility basically. The minimum diameter of tree in which you'd feel safe on. I have hunted some very, very small trees in saddle hunting that I don't recommend anybody hunt. So it really depends on two things: how comfortable you are with the tree you're hunting and moving, and the type of tree in which you're hunting, because you don't really want to hunt a soft tree like a pine tree, that's only as big around as a 20-ounce soda bottle, because it's probably not going to hold your weight once you're up there. The smallest tree I hunted out of was probably about 15 feet off the ground, and I could almost get one hand around the tree where I was tied in at. When I shot the doe from that stand, when I leaned out to shoot her, like you mentioned, the whole tree leaned about 2 feet before it stopped, and my shot went from about 4 yards to almost straight down on top of her. So it's really dependent on your size and the tree. All right, from YouTube, Bruce asks, do you think saddle or tree stand increases your chance of harvest?
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure if this was like, does a saddle or a tree stand give you better odds one versus the other, or do either of them give you an increased chance of harvest over just hunting on the ground? You said he's from Arizona. Not too familiar with hunting in Arizona. If it's the former, saddle versus tree stand, if you have a hardcore enough of a hunter, he's going to be able to make whatever he chooses work. That's kind of how I look at it. I think that for the average guy, if one system or the other allows you to get into a situation and make a hunt that you wouldn't have gotten to do with the other system, then yeah, that could absolutely increase your chance of harvest. Out west, I guess it would just depend. Getting elevated versus staying on the ground depends on a lot of things. Thermals, if you have a lot of elevation. Type of hunt, ambush versus spot and stock or what have you. There's a lot of variables there. I don't really know how to answer that.
Yeah, I think to me saddles are more versatile than a tree stand. So I think if somebody spent the time to learn a saddle to its fullest abilities, I think a saddle would be more beneficial in increasing your harvest than a tree stand would be. So, it's up in the wind. Like you said, a general hunter for the most part is going to be the same, especially the people who wait till the week before season to really start practicing everything. That's probably going to be the same for both of them. A saddle takes a lot more use and trial and error to learn, basically. Go ahead and read the next one. My computer just kicked me out, so I've lost my sheet.
Yeah, Neo Nomad from YouTube wanted to know, does swinging a broadhead around the saddle ropes require special attention so you don't cut yourself out of the tree? So if you're using the movement basically where you're trying to get to your weak side, where you take the bow and you move it up and cross it over the top of your bridge, I mean, usually it seems like for me, you have to tilt your bow up enough to make sure that the arrow clears the trunk of the tree, that by that time your broadhead is so far above your tether that it's really not an issue. Just kind of what I've noticed.
Yeah, especially with a lot of people using a lower tree strap or tree tether height, that really separates that distance considerably. For me, the biggest issue has been, like if I'm trimming a tree as I'm climbing, my tree saw and my lineman's belt. Because you may have your lineman's belt and you're trying to cut a tree limb. When you go through that tree limb, your saw is still going down, and I've nicked my lineman's belt a few times doing that. And to me, that's the benefit of using rope over webbing in a saddle, is that you don't have that tear issue that can occur with webbing when under load compared to with rope.
BJJ Joe from YouTube wants to know what the weight difference is between a complete saddle setup and a complete tree stand setup. I think assuming that everything else is the same, same list of gear inside the pack, same climbing method, then ultimately the overall weight difference for my setups comes down to I think 7 or 8 pounds with my Lone Wolf Assault versus my Kestrel.
Yeah, that's especially when looking at hang-on tree stands, assuming everything climbing method's the same, you look at the weight of the tree stand, the weight of the safety harness, and the weight of the strap to attach a safety harness compared to the entire weight of the saddle and the platform.
Right.
And you're going to come out lighter with a saddle and a platform, whether it's a strap-on platform or whether it's a ring of steps or a platform. You're going to come out lighter with a saddle. Where you kind of get close is if you compare a lightweight climbing tree stand to a complete saddle system with sticks. But then you got to look at the versatility of the saddle over that climbing tree stand. So to me, obviously it goes to the saddle just because it's more versatile. So from Iowa, I'm guessing it's Iowa Barkwood on YouTube, with the saddle and some of the contorted positions, does it affect compound bow accuracy? Do you have issues getting picked off having move around the tree versus standing and turning in place on a stand?
So first part of that question, do the contorted positions affect compound bow accuracy? I would say no, based on my shooting. And the reason is, if you look at any of those contorted positions, what you're basically doing is you're separating the bottom half of your body from the top half of your body. And the bottom half of your body is in whatever position that it needs to basically give you a solid connection. Maybe it's like one step, another step in the bark of the tree. You got like a triangle of support on your lower body. But then your upper body is just, basically in whatever position it needs to be to give you good T-form to be able to shoot a bow. So if you're shooting a 5-yard shot 20 feet up in the tree, you're going to have your torso almost horizontal to the ground. And it's just, compare that to the position you get to standing in a tree stand. You might be able to get close to that position with the top part of your spine, but the bottom part of your spine above your hips is going to be closer to vertical just because you don't really have that much spinal mobility. At least most people don't. So a lot of times you hear about guys shooting higher out of a tree stand than they do with a saddle. I think a lot of that is because they don't have necessarily the same upper body form that they do when they're standing on flat ground. So that adjusts how they're anchoring and how they're looking through their peep sight. So I definitely think that you can get a little bit better form and therefore better shooting with the saddle. With the other part of the question, do you have issues getting picked off having to move around the tree versus standing and turning in place on a stand? Typically for me, whatever I'm using, I'm setting it up so that ideally I don't have to move that much. I'm not just using the 360-degree shooting of a saddle as an excuse to just haphazardly set up on whatever side of the tree I want. There's always a method to the madness. So that being said, typically if I can hear something coming before I see it, which happens fairly often, I will get into whatever position I need to shoot prior to actually seeing the deer. or maybe a squirrel or whatever, but at least you're in a position to be able to draw back and shoot. You do have to practice if, moving to your wrong hand side, if that's, something that you intend on being able to shoot to, just because you do have more moving around an entire tree than you do just standing in place on a platform. And I mean, ultimately it just comes down to your particular setup. Are you going to have to move to that side of the tree, or is all of your stuff going to happen, between, 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock or whatever?
Yeah, I think with a compound bow affecting accuracy, I've never had an issue with the saddle affecting accuracy with the compound. Now with a traditional bow, yes, because sometimes it's hard to get to full expansion, so all the way back to your draw length if you're not using a clicker, because you'll have a tendency to short draw the bow, especially if you're trying to shoot over the bridge or kind of to your weak side. You'll really have that issue where you won't expand as much as you need to. So I've seen it affect accuracy on traditional bow, but not on a compound bow. And I've been saddle hunting for 13 years now, and I can't think of any time I've ever really been picked off moving into position on a deer. Typically by the time the deer gets into range, I'm already in position, compared to waiting for that deer to come in range and then move into position as the last second. If the deer sneaks up on me and I don't think I can get turned and get into position to shoot that deer, a lot of times I'll just let that deer walk, especially if I'm doe hunting. I'll just let that deer go versus trying to risk moving around and, possibly getting picked off.
What if it's a 200 incher?
Well, sometimes you got to let them walk. But I've let one of my target deer walk when I was back in Virginia because I heard a deer coming. I saw the deer. I was like, oh, I don't know what that deer is. So we're going to let it get closer. And then when I realized that's the deer I wanted to shoot, he was about 3 yards from the base of my tree. And I was like, well, there he goes. Because he walked from my strong side to my weak side. So I let him walk.
Yeah, that's tough. The only really tough situation that I had was I was using 4 wild edge steps as my platform. So basically a ring of steps style. And I had a deer come in on basically almost directly behind me. So like my 6 o'clock. So it wasn't that big of a deal. I just did a little drop step and I was ready to shoot. And then it turned around to go to my weak side. So I was like, well, do I turn back around, go over the bridge, or do I just keep backing around the tree to get to that side? Well, the problem is I had a camera arm too, so I couldn't back step anymore because the camera arm was in the way and I wanted to get it on film. So I had to do some weird contortions, and all of a sudden the deer, turned again, went directly to the base of my tree, started sniffing my climbing sticks, and it basically went entirely around the tree in multiple different directions, and it was kind of a mess. In that situation, maybe staying on a platform could have been easier. But then at the same time too, most of that deer's walking, if I was in a hang-on stand, would have been behind the tree. So it still would have been kind of tough in its own right. I think moral of that story is if you're going to use a camera arm and try to get your hunts on film, you can expect to have some issues at some point.
Yep, that is exactly right. That's why I don't film my hunts. From YouTube, Vital Point asks, why are saddles so expensive? It seems like they should be much less than a tree stand. That is a good question. Basically, they're made in the Kestrel, I'm speaking for the Kestrel. The Kestrel is made in a very small shop in the United States in Oregon. And not only, it doesn't require necessarily a ton of material, but it requires a ton of labor in sewing. So you have basically 8 pieces of Cordura fabric that have to be sewn together, binded together. And then you have to cut all that material out, obviously, which is time. And then by the time you get all of the webbing sewn on there, the eyes formed, the eyes sewn through there. So there's a lot of time that those are actually spent on a sewing machine being sewed. And then obviously, you got to cover in there some of your insurance and overhead and stuff like that. So unfortunately, they're not cheap. The mesh Kestrel will be cheaper. I do not have an exact price on that yet, but I know it will be cheaper.
Yeah. Whenever I get that question, I always kind of go back to, well, it probably will be cheaper once somebody finally makes a saddle and has it manufactured in China. I mean, exactly. It's like small volume in the U.S., there's no way around it. It's just the labor cost is tough to compete with, and it's skilled labor too. It's not like just picking people up off the street and just throwing them into the assembly line. So if you look at most of the freebie harnesses that come with tree stands, I'm assuming they're all, for the most part, manufactured overseas. Probably some of it is at least semi-automated. If you look at something like the Lone Wolf Alpha Tech harness, which I would assume is probably made in the U.S., I'm not 100% sure, but that one's $150 if you want like a nice tree stand harness. The Hunter Safety System ones, I think the one that I bought a couple years ago was like $80. It's like you can get variants of quality, and anytime you drop the volume way down, now all of a sudden all of that development work and all that insurance cost needs to be spread over the cost of the product as well. The company needs to recoup that stuff, and if you're not selling as many because your market is smaller, then that part of it is going to be larger as well.
He also asked on YouTube, this is Vital Point again, how are you getting 30 feet with your wild edge steps?
So you have to use some type of extended spacing, basically. So you're not putting a step at every foothold that you would want. You're basically putting one wild edge step at waist height, and then you're putting the second one at overhead. So for me, it'd be like 7 foot. And then basically you're using either what would be called like the cane method, which is like a method where you use a rigger's belt instead of a lineman's belt, or you're using the aider method. And Wild Edge sells their aider, so you can go on YouTube, look up the Wild Edge YouTube channel, and they'll have plenty of videos on their aider actually being used. And it basically just gives you an intermediate step. So when you have those steps spaced out, one at hip height, one overhead, you can have that aider basically spacing the gap between your hip and the ground, so you can actually get your foot up. The other thing I've been able to do too is when I have those steps spaced out like that, I can throw my lineman's belt around the tree, kind of have it loose, and then just kind of throw that lineman's belt up as high as I can, and then I can just kind of hang from that top step and just kind of walk up the tree. Just kind of hold my body out away from the tree until I get onto that waist level step, and then I pull myself close, tighten the lineman's belt, attach the next step directly overhead, and then loosen up the lineman's belt a little bit, flip that lineman's belt up high, again just hang from that top step and walk up the tree until I'm onto that waist level step, and just repeat that all the way up. And so that gets me to 28 feet, and then the platform would be 2 feet above that.
So essentially you're just increasing your spacing through the cane method or through an aider.
Yep.
All right, a lot of people want to know, when's the next elk hunt?
Next year we're going to be going back out to either Colorado or Wyoming. A couple of the guys that I go with have points for Wyoming. I have a couple points for Wyoming. So the question is going to be, do we want to go to Wyoming, or do we want to go back to Old Reliable, the place that we've gone the last couple times to Colorado, now that we know it, basically with 2 years experience and boots on the ground, and try to get it done that way. I don't think the elk hunting is fantastic. I think the mule deer hunting is a lot better proportionately in that particular area. So you just kind of got to balance maybe the elk hunting is better in Wyoming, but we're going in completely blind. So we'll see. But it'll most likely be next year for sure.
Steve from YouTube wants to know, how do you pack extra clothing to the tree when saddle hunting?
Either inside the pack or lashed to the outside of the pack, depending on how much I'm carrying.
Yeah, I use a simple, I don't even remember, I did a YouTube video on them, what they're called now. It's basically a bungee cord. I'll roll my clothes up, bungee cord them together, and then I'll either attach them to my little sling pack or to my climbing sticks, basically, and then carry them in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Brian from YouTube, thinking about doing a rock harness and sit drag, but maybe a kestrel. Is it worth the money?
I think you might be too biased to answer this question.
I concur. I've never used a sit drag and rock harness, so I couldn't tell you that from that aspect anyways.
Yeah, so I've used both, and basically the difference is, to me, number one, the lineman's loops. With the rock harness, you're DIYing the lineman's loops. You're taking a little bit of risk there. Since they're not tight to your hip, they're a little bit harder to find. So I'd find myself constantly, double and triple checking to make sure that I actually had the carabiner in the lineman's loop. Whereas with the kestrel, I mean, I still double check, but 99.99% of the time, if I feel the carabiner go into the loop on the side of my hip, it's actually in there. So that's one thing. The other thing with the rock harness is that since you got the blade loop in the center, it makes it a little bit harder to go to the bathroom. The front of the kestrel is a little bit more clear. You don't have that issue. The sit drag, since it's kind of like a separate piece as compared to the rock harness, it's, if you ever put slack in the tether, it kind of falls down the backside of your thighs. So, for example, if I was using a platform, while I'm actually sitting in the saddle, sitting in the sit drag, everything would be totally fine. If I ever wanted to kind of stand up and spin 180 degrees to shoot to my weak side, then that sit drag would kind of fall down the backside of my thighs, and I'd have to kind of reset it before I would actually put my weight back in the saddle. Whereas with the kestrel, obviously, it's just like an extension of your body. Once you got it set up and you got the saddle on, you don't have to worry about it anymore. So for me, I think it's worth the extra money, but you got to answer that one for yourself too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I don't necessarily consider a sit drag a saddle because it's not designed that way. Like you said, it's lacking the lineman's loop, the leg straps, and a waist buckle to hold it all there. So safety-wise, there's a lot compromised on it. All right, so the next question. A lot of people want to know, where can they buy a bow building kit like the one used to build your bamboo eye reflex deflex longbow?
So the kit that I bought was from eBay. I'm like 99% sure the person's name was like Legolas Bows or something like that. I've tried checking multiple times and I haven't found anything that was exactly like it. The kit that I bought basically had a strip of bamboo, and it had a strip of pre-tapered ipe. So it was pre-tapered to something like 100 pounds. So it was way thicker than you needed it to be, but at least it had somewhat of a pre-taper there in place. So all you had to really do was set the stuff up in a form that you had to build, glue them together, and then tiller, which the tillering took by far the longest amount of time out of that entire process. Three Rivers Archery has some kits that you can put together. I haven't seen the exact combination of woods that I used in my bow. There's another place I think called Tenbrook Archery, if I'm remembering that right. I actually bought a kit from them. The difference between the kit that I bought from them and the one I bought originally was this one was not pre-tapered. So I got a piece of bamboo for the backing, and then I got basically like a half-inch thick by like 2-inch wide by 72-inch piece of ipe. So in order to get that ready to glue, I had to do my own pre-tapering, and I went and rented some time at a local wood shop and did that on a table saw and a bandsaw. And so you can do it that way if you have the access to the tools. If you wanted to start and do all hand tools, starting from that much wood, you're going to be spending a lot of time on the tillering process. Just be aware of that. So you might be willing to compromise what woods you're willing to do just to get a kit that's going to be a little bit more conducive to making a bow, particularly if it's your first one.
Yeah, you might also check Pine Hollow longbows. Mike Yancey used to own it. He's in Northwest Arkansas. I know he used to have some kits like that back when I did a lot of self bow stuff, so I might check with him. Stevie from YouTube wants to know, can you use a Ropeman 1 with 8mm cord?
I wouldn't recommend it. So
I think they're rated at 10mm, right?
Yeah, the Ropeman 1 I believe is 10 to 13mm, and the Ropeman 2 is 8 to 13, so it's got a larger range. The difference between the Ropeman 1 and the 2 is how they actually squeeze down on the rope. The cams have a different design. It's going to be hard to explain, but basically the Ropeman 1 has larger teeth, whereas the Ropeman 2 has these little micro teeth that kind of bite into the sheath. So a Ropeman 2 is a lot more critical of which rope you use, because if you use the wrong kind of rope with a Ropeman 2, it'll really tear up the sheath, make it all fuzzy really fast. With the Ropeman 1, it's a little bit nicer of an ascender, a little bit easier to use in my opinion. Works with more ropes for the sheath, but it has to work with a larger rope. Otherwise you risk that rope slipping through the cam. So I think read some people on the forums using smaller rope like 9 or 10mm with the Ropeman 1, but I would not recommend it.
I haven't used them a whole lot, so glad you have to field that question, because I obviously, if I would just go by whatever the manufacturer recommended. All right, from Hometown Hunting on YouTube, what is a tree selection like when saddle hunting? Size, thickness, etc.
I mean, there's really not a lot of difference for me in tree selection of a saddle versus a hang-on. I mean, pretty much any tree that I would want to put a saddle in, I could probably force a hang-on into, and vice versa. So, I mean, you can basically just treat it however you want.
And the more you saddle hunt, or the more you hunt with whatever type of method you're using, the more you're going to tend to favor a certain type of tree, a certain size of tree. So it's really dependent on the hunter for the most part. Like you said, pretty much any tree that you can saddle hunt from, you can put a hang on in, for that matter. So you're gonna develop a preference for size, thickness, diameter, whatever you want to call it. You're gonna tend to gravitate towards a specific tree or a specific setup where there may be a tree 2 feet behind you that you can kind of lean back against, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, sometimes it just comes down to the right tree is in the right spot, and whatever it looks like, you're gonna have to force yourself to get into it. Whereas otherwise, sometimes you got a little bit more options. The one thing to mention, though, that I did forget was that if you're hunting evergreens, you can stick a saddle in them, but you're not going to be able to use all the advantages of a saddle. You're basically going to be, just hunting off that one side unless you clear out a ton of limbs.
Yeah, if you have to cut a hole into the tree to put a saddle in, that's probably the time where you're going to want to use a hang-on stand over a saddle. So from your mesh kestrel video, the $64 question is, when will the mesh kestrel be available?
It is available right now on the arrowhunter.us website. It was released about the 4th of July, and it's actually called the Kite, K-I-T-E, not the mesh kestrel as we've been calling it.
They've graciously given us one to do a giveaway with here on the podcast, so keep an eye out for that. We're going to be doing a giveaway for one of those here soon.
I saw updates to the lineman's belt posted on their Facebook page. Do you know if those are going to be implemented?
Yes, they will be.
Have you tried it out at all? It looks like it's kind of like a rope version of an Ascender, kind of.
Basically, that's what it is. It's similar to, if you can think back to the evolution where we use the paw as the ability to adjust the bridge. It's kind of the same concept, but moved to the lineman's belt.
Okay.
So it's kind of a replacement for Ropeman 1 through ropes and webbing, basically, instead of using a mechanical device.
Okay.
So a few people want to know, what's the updates on the DIY quivalizer?
Other than the fact that it just looks goofy. I mean, it works. It works totally fine. Some people asked if you're able to use it in like a saddle or a tree stand. The answer is yes. If you're doing the over the bridge type of thing, if you got an arrow knocked, you already got to tilt your bow up in the air anyway to get the arrow to clear the trunk of the tree. So having that extra long stabilizer doesn't really give you that much of an extra impact. What it seems like for walking is that it's easier for me to put the bow over my shoulders and basically be able to walk. So like if I set the bow on the top of my shoulders and I have the stabilizer sticking out in front of me on one side of my neck, and then my sight housing is sticking off on the other side of my neck, it seems to actually ride there pretty well because of that extra balance, everything pulling it forward. It doesn't want to fall off the backside of your shoulders. So that's kind of nice. It doesn't work obviously as well if you're going to use like a shoulder strap, just because that extra long quiver is basically hanging down in the grass. Shooting wise and stability wise, it kind of depends on your setup. My bows, I found I can hold pretty steady without much extra stabilizers attached, so it's probably more than I need. So when I shoot, it just tilts downward more. I haven't noticed a ton of difference in the overall ability for me to hold steady. It's probably a little bit, I don't shoot long enough range, I don't think, where I would start to notice a difference in that pin float between using that extra long stabilizer of the quivalizer knockoff versus like an actual just long stabilizer. And let's see, were there any, I haven't shot it that much in wind. Knocking a second arrow, so Normally, you'd have to pull your arrow out of a quiver, whether it's on the left side or your other side of your bow or on the tree. Pull it around the bow and nock it to be able to shoot a second arrow. Whereas with the equivalizer, since the arrows are on the same side of the bow as your rest, all you got to do is tilt the bow and you just grab your second arrow, move it 4 inches until it's sitting on the rest, knock it, and then you're ready to draw back and shoot again. So I actually think with like 5 minutes of practice, you'll find that it's easier to get a second shot off with that type of a quiver. And if you're pushing a bow through the grass or whatever, like spot and stock, which I don't do a whole lot of, you're keeping everything out of the grass. Your sight pins are out of the grass, your rest is out of the grass, and your arrows are now out of the grass. You're not basically burying your quiver into the ground to be able to push your bow along. So there's definitely some advantages to it for the right setup.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept, and this is kind of how this whole thing spawned. I know me and you were talking about it off the podcast or text message and stuff about, trying it out and seeing, and that's kind of what spurred this whole DIY equivalizer up. So it's interesting to see how it's coming along and if you're going to continue to use it or if you're going to go back to a traditional quiver setup. So a question we get a lot is just kind of how high can you get with X setup? That may be a Millennium tree stand with lone wolf sticks or with muddy sticks and a lone wolf tree stand. So kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, it's if you know what the spacing is of the stick, like what your step spacing is, say it's 24 inches or whatever, and you're using 4 sticks, you get 24 times 4. And then if you know what your spacing is between the sticks, say it's 25 inches, you multiply that by the number of gaps you have, and you just add that all up. You can just do it, on your cell phone calculator or whatever, and that will give you a really quick idea of how high you can get with any particular setup, any number of sticks. It's really hard for me to know what somebody's setup is going to be because they might have a different, inter-stick spacing than I would. So the easiest way to find out what it is for yourself is just add up all those values for how many sticks you want to use, and you'll get your height.
That's the biggest factor is the intra-stick spacing. And what I recommend is just take 2 climbing sticks out to a tree, put up the first one, stand on it, set your stick going, and then measure that spacing. Do that 6 or 8 times, and you're going to get an average of what you like step spacing-wise or stick spacing-wise. So that will give you that basically intra-step or intra-stick spacing distance, and then that's going to be able to calculate how high you're going to reach with your setup. Because for the most part, your tree stand is not going to matter because your platform for your tree stand, your platform for your saddle, they're all going to be about the same distance from that top stick. It's a distance in between each stick, whether you're using 3 sticks or 4 sticks, 5 sticks, however many sticks.
Yep.
Appalachian on the Hunt asks over on YouTube, if hunting in warm weather were not an issue, would you still pick the mesh over the original Kestrel? He has an original Kestrel and doesn't see himself changing, but still interested in the mesh for early season Kentucky.
I would say it depends more on what buckles you want for a lot of people. Unless you're hunting in really hot weather, it's like if you're hunting in really hot weather, yeah, go with the mesh. Like you'll be glad you did. But if it's not that big of an issue, if you're hunting in cool weather more often than you're hunting in sweaty weather, I would say it probably just comes down to do you mind stepping through leg loops and feeding a buckle through that's not a quick release that'll take you an extra 10 seconds, or do you prefer to have the quick releases? I know some guys like to attach the quick release on the waist buckle, and then they attach the quick releases behind their legs and just walk in with the saddle like that, so it's not affecting how they walk. Then once they get to the tree, they'll unclip the quick releases and clip them back onto their legs. I would say that's probably the bigger thing for me, is kind of what buckles you would want, unless you're hunting in really hot weather.
I think the weight, obviously the mesh Kestrel is going to be a lot lighter because we did use different buckles and different materials. When we developed it, it wasn't necessarily, I can never remember a time saddle hunting outside of a trophy line tree saddle where I thought my Kestrel was just too hot wearing. It's such a small piece of fabric on your butt. I've never really had a time where I thought, okay, my butt is sweating specifically because of my Kestrel. So to me, the mesh, it's more about going to the ultralight side, where we went to a lighter fabric, lighter buckles, lighter waist buckle as well. So that's the biggest thing. And then like Garrett mentioned, the buckles, the quick release. So the leg buckles are still kind of technically a quick release. They're more of a feed through, so they'll take a second or two longer. It's kind of a square buckle. I can't think of the name of them off the top of my head. And then the waist buckles feed through, so it's going to take you a little longer to put it on, or if you don't have issues stepping through like Garrett mentioned.
Yeah, I usually just step through.
I do too, for the most part. I don't ever really use them. Another question. This is from Maine Snowman 5509. Lucas, I guess. How come on the Kestrel, the camo material is concealed against your body, leaving the gray exposed? It seems like it's manufactured backwards. So we offer, they offer 3 colors for the Kestrel. They offer a gray and olive green, and then the camouflage. And you can pick your color, and basically what that means is that will be the color that is exposed to the outside. So what they do is when they sew that, because it's 8 pieces of Cordura fabric, they go ahead and sew most of them, because the 2 popular colors I believe are gray and camo. They bind those 2 together, so then if somebody picks a gray one, they sew the gray to the outside. If somebody sews a camo in, they sew the camo to the inside. So just the opposite. Like my Kestrel is a gray Kestrel. The camo fabric is on the inside. It's just kind of the way it's made, because that saves down on, allows them to make the seat pattern in a larger bulk unit. And then when people pick gray or green or gray or camo, it just picks what side of the fabric goes to the outside compared to the inside. Mm-hmm. So that's why you'll see it on the inside with the camo. From YouTube, Oscar wants to know, where did you get the camo on your sticks?
Those are stealth strips. You can get them from stealthoutdoors.com. I've been using them forever on pretty much all my sticks and a lot of my other accessories.
Yeah, pretty much everything. I'm surprised you don't have camouflage just stuck, made camo out of it yet. From YouTube, Luke wants to know, do you use a new weather history site?
So a couple years ago when I uploaded a video on public land scouting, I talked about a wind finder site, where basically you could look up the weather history on kind of a radar style graph and see for a given month what the predominant wind directions statistically are. That website has changed a little bit, and I haven't been on it super recently to know if it's still available. As far as I'm aware, that option is still available. I also use Scout Look Weather, and I use Weather Underground. Those are kind of my 2 main real-time apps. But I haven't really had the need to check for historical data, just because I already have it all recorded. So if that wind finder site is down and it might be harder to navigate than I made it look like in the video, I'll just have to find something new to be able to use, and I'll probably include that in a new video.
David from YouTube wants to know what your arrow length is and what your total weight is. He doesn't specify whether it's for the compound or for the trad bow.
For compound, I think I'm probably settled on for this year 28-inch arrows, 560 grains. I'm not hunting out west this year, and for the most part, what I'm going to use my compound for is going to be metro hunts, where they mandates a 20-yard maximum. So I'm totally fine with the trajectory at 560 grains. In fact, I could probably go heavier and still be totally happy with it. So I'm probably going to leave it at that for now. When I go out west next year, I might change it, might drop down a little bit, but most likely I'm going to stick over 500 grains and that 28-inch arrow length. For trad, I like to stay around the 10 grain per pound mark. So for me, that's around 500 grains.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to saying trad right now. I have no idea. I've got like 7, 8 different brands of arrows, lengths, and spines that I'm shooting. I still can't get one to separate from the rest as to which one's better. And for the compound bow, I'm shooting right around that 500 grain mark. I'm going to try to go heavier and more front of center. But we got Total Archery Challenge coming up next month, so I'm going to wait till after that. Hopefully trash all my current arrows. That gives me a reason to buy new ones.
Yeah, the Total Archery Challenge is like, do you go out there with your hunting setup to see how good you are and end up losing a lot of arrows because your trajectory sucks, or it's like, do you build a Total Archery Challenge specific arrow that'll allow you to shoot better scores at the Total Archery Challenge, but then you got to change it back to your hunting setup?
I just go out there with what I got, fling arrows. We typically get out of the. We don't typically aim for vitals. It's like, okay, who can shoot it in the head at 64 yards or whatever. So that's why arrows end up broken and missing. From YouTube, Adam wants to know, will an over-the-center buckle work exactly like a boat buckle?
So a boat buckle is actually a brand. It is a type of over-center buckle. There's a few different types of over-center buckles, and over-center buckle is just a generic term for the type of buckle that basically uses leverage to use the buckle to cam over itself in a sense, so that you can get a strap over tightened beyond what you'd be able to tighten it just by hand. And the boat buckle is a type of that. So if you see guys with their boats and their trailers, I mean, that's obviously where they get the name. They do a lot of marine stuff. They use the straps on the back of their boats to mount to the trailer, and they'll hand tighten them down and just basically take that handle and cam it over to get those straps nice and tight. For hunting, the advantage that it serves for like a camera arm is that it's dead silent versus a ratchet. So you might not get as much of an over tightening effect as you get with a ratchet strap, but for something like a camera arm, you don't really need to get it as tight as you would with a ratchet strap, particularly if you're using a low stretch strap like polyester or polypropylene.
I don't have any experience with them. I had an old Summit tree stand that used one, and I replaced it very quickly because I just did not like the over-the-center style buckles personally. So I know you really like them. So it's really dependent on the person. Try them, see if you like them. From YouTube, Das wants to know, how do you like the Primo's rocker vest? On mine, the back support poked through the top. If you have any tips on preventing that, let him know.
So it's kind of funny. I never had any issues with it until after you said that comment, and then I noticed that on mine, the leg support on the seat was starting to pop through. The only thing that I can think of to help prevent that from happening any further would be to like sew an extra piece of Cordura fabric on it. I don't really know how else to prevent it. But other than that, I really love the vest. It's really comfortable, especially given the fact that it doesn't actually have a pad. It's just kind of like a Crazy Creek chair type of design built into a turkey vest, and it's got tons of storage.
Jacob from YouTube wants to know what turkey calls you were using.
I pretty much, for this whole year, used the calls from callingallturkeys.com, which Shane Simpson is the owner of. The call that I used in the video that I uploaded was the 3-reed batwing style. I really like that call, and in fact, I ordered like 6 more of them when he put them on clearance this year, so I got a ton of those calls. And he also released some of his own calls called the Prodigy series, a little bit different latex tension than the white calls. His are a red tape. That's how you differentiate them, and I like those ones as well.
SRT Junkie, this looks more like a statement, a question. Dude, get a triple lock carabiner, you're going to get someone else killed. I guess he's referencing the carabiners on a saddle, maybe? I did a DIY lineman's belt video. So I used twist lock carabiners for one of my carabiners, and the other one I used a wire gate carabiner. And the funny thing is I actually did reference like Westgate or Westspur, all their arborist basically standards, and like this is the type of carabiner you'd want to use if you're going to follow those standards. I've seen videos of triple lock carabiners opening up. It can be done. It's not very likely. I mean, ultimately you're just trying to build redundancies into the system and try and prevent things from happening. When I'm climbing a tree, I mean, I'm basically fully focused on climbing the tree and everything that's going on. I'm not trying to do some other task while, the carabiners are rubbing against something or twisting and turning. And I don't think, for me, I'm personally comfortable using like twist lock carabiners or like the auto locking ones that the Kestrel comes with. Yeah, I think any type of locking carabiner to auto locking carabiner is fine. I don't necessarily think you need a triple locking carabiner. It gets kind of difficult when you start wearing gloves and it's negative degrees and you're trying to deal with all that. That just sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, and the fact too that not one single hunting-based company uses them should say something about how necessary they are.
Right. So from YouTube, looks like Ringtail. How do you like the alpaca socks? Do you like them better than merino?
They're nice and fluffy. I like my alpaca socks are my favorite socks by far for just lounging around the house in the wintertime when it's nice and cool. They're like wearing slippers. They're really comfortable and warm. I do like them also on the hunts. Apart from like wearing an alpaca sock on one foot and a merino sock on the other foot, it's tough to really tell which is better. They're both wearing fine for me. The last merino socks that I've worn, I had like 3 pairs and I basically got like 2 or 3 years of use out of them before they finally wore holes in them. But I mean, alpaca, compared to merino, the fibers are hollow versus merino, so there's a few theoretical advantages to alpaca. One, it's supposed to be able to keep your body a little bit warmer for the same amount of fibers because of that hollow fiber construction. And then it's also supposed to dry quicker. I haven't really tested that yet. I suppose the way you could test that would be to wash both of them and then see which one dries faster. But then, of course, you need the same exact construction and same thickness, and that gets kind of hard to do. I did also, just a couple days ago, order an alpaca quarter zip top. So it's like a blend of 70% alpaca, 30% merino wool in a quarter zip. So that one is from, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it. It's spelled like athlete without the A, like thleet. I'm sure that's probably not being pronounced right, but I love the alpaca enough in the socks that I really wanted to try it out with the shirt. So when I get that base layer shirt in, I'll probably do some type of test compared to my first light and just see like how quickly they dry out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think the socks, the interesting way to test it would be basically just put one on each foot, get your feet wet, and then walk around and kind of just basically go off of, how did it feel like it dried quicker, or get your foot wet and then put it in your shoe to kind of figure out which one dried quicker,
right?
Or just a little bit of moisture on them.
Or get them soaked, and then it would need to be cold out, but you could get them soaked on each foot and then just see which one gets cold faster.
Right.
The challenge is my alpaca socks are really fluffy, whereas the merino ones I have some spandex sewn into them, and they're a little bit tighter on the foot, and they don't have quite the same amount of loft, so it's hard to make an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah. So Steve from YouTube wants to know, he can't make sense of the Alps Commander pack frame and bag. If you leave it at camp and have an animal down, do you head back to camp to get your frame and then go back and pack the animal out? I feel that I would want the frame with me at all times. He's new to this and he's trying to learn.
So that's basically what I've done in the past. That's what I did last year with my mule deer. I shot the deer with the pack frame back at camp, and then quartered the animal out where I shot it. And then luckily I had a couple of the guys I was with in the same area, and we all just kind of slung a quarter or a game bag over our shoulders and just walked back downhill to camp. And then once at camp, we loaded the meat onto the frame, and then I walked back down to the truck in one trip. So basically, if I were to say I was solo, yeah, I would probably walk back down to camp, get that pack frame after all the meat was in the bags, then walk back to the kill site and walk back. So if you were hunting really deep in, like we're always within, a couple miles of camp, if for some reason I was 5 miles away from where my pack frame was, that would suck because it's an extra, 10 miles round trip to get that pack frame back to the animal. So I guess it works for me in the way that we hunt, but there's probably some scenarios where you'd probably want to have, an expandable type pack.
Yeah, I think it depends on whether you're hunting elk or mule deer for sure. I mean, mule deer, where you obviously can probably get the entire load out in one go with a mule deer on a packed frame, you might want to carry the pack with you. Something like an elk, obviously you're not going to get that out in one trip, and like you said, depending on how far you are from camp, you could always go ahead and quarter the animal up, get it hung up, get it airing out, take the tenderloins in the bag, in a trash bag, and pack them down to get the frame to pack the rest of the meat with. So, it's kind of variable on how you're hunting and where you're hunting and what species you're hunting, in my opinion. Ian from YouTube, did you ever end up making the second bow you were working on?
No, I have all the materials sitting on my workbench. Then I have an oven that I built to be able to cure the glue, and I have the glue. But it's just been so far down on my priority list. My to-do list is never empty. There's always things getting added to it before I can clear it out. And it's been such a low priority, especially since I got that RK1, that I don't know if I'll ever actually get around to it.
River Valley Outdoors wants to know, or wants you to do a side-by-side comparison of your laser Milwaukee M18 combo against the K-Drill. He says the laser looks to be a little faster.
Yeah, so this is an ice fishing question. The laser bit is a little bit heavier of an auger, but it's got a different pitch. So when you attach it to a power drill and you punch your holes through the ice, it works a little bit differently than the K-Drill does. The K-Drill is a composite construction, so it's a little bit lighter. It's got a center cutting bit. And basically, in a nutshell, and I know this because my dad has the K-Drill and I have the laser, and we have the exact same drill that was bought at the exact same time and the exact same sale. The laser is faster. The K-Drill is lighter, and the K-Drill has the ability to cut overlapping holes because it has that center bit. So it kind of comes down to what you want more. It's like, do you want the speed or do you want the lightweight? Which one is a higher priority?
Joseph from YouTube wants to know, how would you use a lineman's belt on a rock climbing harness? I know that I can hook it into the sit drag loops, but would feel more comfortable with them being connected to my body. We kind of hit it on this one a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I for sure wouldn't just attach them to the sit drag loops because there's not much connecting the sit drag to the rock harness, at least not the way that I did it in my video. So you pretty much have to make your own lineman's loops, and the DIY hunting saddle sit drag video that I have on YouTube, you can get a little bit more information if that's something you're really interested in.
C-Trick13 wants to know, is there any reason why you switched from Fusion to Cypher?
I had a bunch of stuff from First Light in the Fusion camo, and then I bought a Uncapagre, I think that's how you pronounce it, jacket, and I bought that in the Cypher camo, so he was just, I think, curious as to why I didn't stick with Fusion. Basically, I like both patterns. They maybe aren't my favorite overall out of all the hunting patterns, but out of those garments, I feel like Cypher is a really good whitetail pattern because it's the nice neutral colors. I don't feel like you necessarily need the green, especially for a cold weather garment when a lot of the stuff's already going to be barren in terms of the trees anyway. So that's really the only main difference. I think they're both probably fine.
Stevie D101 from YouTube wants to know, when you pack in warmer boots, what do you do with the ones you wear in? Open, sweaty boots can't help when it comes to smell. There is no better motivation to fill your tag in October than trying to fill them in late season.
Yes, that is very true. My standards drop tremendously in late season. So, yeah, typically I take the boots that I wear in and I just leave them at the base of the tree. For me, it hasn't been worth it to try and do anything else. I don't know if there's anything to it or not. I think we talked about this a little bit in the scent control podcast, but it seems like when it gets really cold, deer don't react to odor as much as they do when it's warmer out. And I don't know if that has to do with the thermal energy of the scent molecules and whatnot, but yeah, I don't worry about it too much. Just play the wind and have at it.
Yeah, I would think, being the cold weather, the colder air is going to hold your scent down closer to the ground or closer to that particular area if there's no wind than on a warmer day where, the scent's going to rise basically with the air. Jared from YouTube wants to know, how do you pack in all your gear and clothing to your stand? He has his layering system down, but is getting all of it to the stand without overheating is a pain.
Yeah, so, with a tree stand as opposed to a saddle, when I'm carrying the extra layers, it all just gets bungeed to the the pack, which is bungee to the stand. So everything's just bungee to the stand in some way or another. And if you have a long way to walk in, like there's just no way of getting around it. If you're getting too hot, you either need to slow down or you need to take a layer off. So if it's really cold and I got a long ways to go, I'll usually just have like a merino top and like a windbreaker over the top of that. It's about as light as I can go. If I wear just the merino, then that wind just bites too much. So I need to have that little wind protection layer ideally. But yeah, you just gotta regulate. You just gotta slow down if you need to, and just kind of not be afraid to take the stand off your back and take an extra 2 minutes to either add or remove a layer as you go.
And don't be afraid to walk out to the tree stand in the dark and just your base layers. You might look funny to yourself, but nobody else is going to see you. I think a lot of people will wear their hunting pants or a light jacket out there, especially when it's cold, compared to just wearing their, 230 gram or whatever it is, merino wool base layers to the tree, and then start layering up once they get to the tree. Because when it's really cold, that's typically what I'll do, is I'll just wear my base layers all the way to the tree. When I get to the tree, like I said, I may take 2 minutes to just sit there until I start to chill off a little bit, and then layer up before I start climbing.
Mm-hmm.
Matter Gilly Man from YouTube wants to know if you've ever tried the Snap reusable gel warmers. I guess he's talking about the reusable hand warmers.
Yeah, those ones that have the little, looks like a nickel floating around in the gel, and you pop it and it gets hot. It's a chemical type of hand warmer. There's some reason, I've tried them. My parents had one once and I went to visit. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. But there was some reason I didn't like them that much for hunting. I think it was just the overall length of time that they lasted. I don't think it was that long. It seemed like it was something that was made more for, you got a sore back and you want to heat it up for a half an hour.
Yeah. The ones I've seen and the ones I've kind of used, I didn't use them for two reasons. The weight, they're drastically heavier than a traditional hand warmer. And the, like you said, the burn time, if you will, the amount of time they generate heat is a lot shorter. So to me, those are the two big things. And like you mentioned, I think they're made for home use, where you pop them at home, put them on your knee, put them on whatever, they burn for 30 minutes, and then they're pretty much toast.
Mm-hmm.
Butterdog01 from YouTube, how do you find your public land?
So the easiest way would be to buy a subscription from Onyx, but there are plenty of free options. One would be to look at your state's DNR website. A lot of times the state will have a list or a map of what land is available to hunt on. And if you look at the state website, if they don't have all the info you're looking for, you can also check the county websites. Sometimes the county websites will have things like tax forfeited land that you're able to hunt on, and the state might not have maps of that, so you have to kind of dig into the individual counties. A lot of times what county websites will also have is they'll have their own GIS websites. So if you type in Scott County GIS in Google, oftentimes a county will have a website where they have their own mapping system where you can look at an aerial photo and it'll have all the property lines segmented off, and you can just click on whatever parcel you want and get that information for free. The downside is that you have to do a lot of clicking, usually if they don't have the public land highlighted, and then you still might not know if that public land that you find is actually huntable or not. It might be off limits to hunting even though it's public. I found the same thing with Onyx. Sometimes they'll have the stuff highlighted that you're not technically allowed to hunt, even though it's state or federally owned. So you'd have to do a little bit of research, maybe do some phone calls.
A lot of those county GIS maps are searchable by the owner. So
Yep.
if you can find a piece of public land and it has whoever owns it, it may be listed as the county owns it or the city owns it, or USA, however they label public lands in there, then you can search by that landowner and it will show you. A lot of times it will zoom out to the farthest point to show you all of those parcels on the screen, basically. So that's a good way to locate the public land in that area.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That definitely beats clicking on all the adjacent parcels to try and find out where exactly the total boundaries are.
Yeah. So Mike from YouTube wants to know if you ever considered the Sitka Fanatic jacket to eliminate the needs for an external hand muff.
Yeah, so my system right now, I got the Sanctuary bibs, and I have the Woodbury jacket, and then I used an external muff for my hands. So I do like the Fanatic jacket. I've tried it on at Cabela's. I like the feel of fleece. It's obviously very quiet. The Fanatic jacket, if I remember right, didn't have a hood, which was a nice feature of the Woodbury. They have obviously like hats that are made out of the same material. So, I mean, some of it comes down to one layering system versus the other. Like if I would use a Fanatic jacket with First Light bibs, it probably wouldn't work as well as, you know, the First Light bibs and the First Light jacket. They're all kind of made to mesh within their own systems. But I think that was probably the main thing. And other than that, just the cost difference. I was able to get the First Light stuff at a discount, whereas Sitka, unless it was also a similar type of sale, I would have had to pay a lot more.
Yeah, I like just even like hoodies that have a kangaroo pocket on them. I like being able to put my hands in them. So to me, it's really interesting to see the Fanatic jacket have something like that. I wish more companies would offer that, even in just lightweight, like merino hoodies, just because I hate gloves. I just want to stick my hands in there to keep the sun off of them or to keep my hands just a little bit warm. So to me, it's a really interesting idea. I'm just not a fan of Sitka products personally. YouTube, Abby wants to know if you think the rope mod would work on the XOP climbing sticks.
So essentially, any type of stick that has a button type of attachment system where you're putting a loop over a button, most likely is going to work with the rope mod. Your variables will be what diameter rope is going to work the best. So for something like a Lone Wolf stick, usually like 5/16 inch AM steel or like 8 millimeter accessory cord seems to work pretty well. But that might be different on the XOP. It might be different on some kind of mod that you do yourself. Like if you're adding custom Versa buttons to like a Hawk stick that doesn't come with them. So that's kind of your biggest variable. Usually it'll work. You just got to find out the right sizes for everything.
Yeah, I have no experience with the XOP climbing sticks. I've seen one in person. I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think their button isn't totally round. I think it's like an abbreviated button. So
yeah,
that might affect it a little bit.
The sides are cut off on it, or the top, one of the two are cut off. So it's very oval shape, if you will.
Most likely somebody's already tried it, and it's probably on the internet somewhere.
Internet is a vast information of some knowledge and a lot of BS. You just have to wade through a lot to find the good stuff.
Yep. That'll do it for this episode. Keep those questions coming, and at some point we'll be able to put another one of these types of podcasts together. Special thanks to Arrow Hunter for helping make this podcast happen. Go check out the new kite saddle in addition to the Kestrel at arrowhunter.us. Subscribe to the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network wherever you download your podcasts, and be sure to follow